So what brands should be doing, rather than just the incremental thing, which is really, like I say, a tactical response, is they should be very clear about what their communication objectives are. And for each objective, they should have the best-in-class measure to make sure that they are properly understanding how that particular variable is performing across creative executions.
I am here with Dr. Duane Varan. Dr. Varan, do you want to take us through a little trip through your background?
Sure. I graduated once upon a time. My PhD research was really fascinating. I took these islands in the Pacific that didn't have television, and the government there was phasing in TV one island at a time. And so I had the perfect natural experiment. And so eventually one island got TV and the other didn't, and eventually both islands got TV. And that really was kind of like the dawn of my career, in the early 90s. And ever since then, I've loved experimental design. And so everything that I've done ever since has really been grounded in experimental design. And eventually that took me into neuroscience as well. And the thing that I realized very early in my career was that when we're talking about media or marketing, fundamentally above all, we're talking about human emotion. But the problem that we have is that people lack access to their own emotional journey. So anytime you ask people about how they're feeling about something or anything about their emotions, what they're telling you is the rational interpretation of what they think they must be feeling, which is actually very different to what they're really feeling. And so I built my career around trying to measure that more directly. And we've been very successful, I mean, both in my academic career and in business as well. And it's just, I think a much better way of looking at media and marketing research.
Yeah, for sure. We definitely want to have as close to ground level truth and not be working on self-reports and assumptions. So we always start with a question that is very short but very challenging. What does the term brand mean to you?
To me, brand is real estate of the mind. If you think about any category, that category for any one individual, that category has a certain meaning, and there are certain associations that are formed in their mind around that. And the question is, how much of that space do you as a brand, occupy? And I think it's one of the things that's actually very deceptive about branding, because you may have two brands and one might have 30% market share and the other might have 28% market share. And you might think, that's not that much of a difference. The 30% is not that much better. But actually, for most people, we don't make our decisions around many brands. We tend to land on a brand and go with that brand in many categories. So it's a question about being the leader, not about being second best, but about being best in an individual's mind. So you might be thinking Coke has some of my real estate, Pepsi has some of my real estate, but there's not an equal or a semi-equal probability that I'll go with Coke or Pepsi at any time. I'm probably going to go with Coke. So that's a really important, I think, nuance to it, that it's a game for leadership. It's not a game to be, to be just a player. Or to have like a share of that market. You really want to kind of like own that space in a consumer's mind.
Yeah, that sounds daunting, but you can define your niche as narrowly as you want to. And if you're the only person in people's mind, as far as that niche is concerned, you're in a market of one, and you can set your terms and do well by them. So you started MediaScience, which is a lab consulting for some big names. And can you tell us about MediaScience and like what you guys are testing there and why?
Yeah, so MediaScience is probably the leader in the market in terms of testing ad innovation. So just about any major ad innovation that you can think of in the industry was first studied at MediaScience. So picture-in-picture advertising, 6-second ads, limited interruption advertising, the choice model for ads, interactive, just about every interactive thing you can imagine. All of these things were first tested at MediaScience. Pretty much every TV network every major TV network group is a client of ours. Many global brands, many social media firms, so certainly, that's I think where we really shine the best, particularly because of our capabilities. We have a very deep toolbox. We pretty much have every tool under the sun at our disposal in terms of studying. And what we tend to do is look at a problem and find the best-in-class method for studying it. We're boutique. We're not the largest players. We don't have big global conglomerates as our shareholders. We're nimble, but I think we have an exciting, we're an exciting business. We think of ourselves more as a movement. We're a movement really about responding to the changing landscape.
Yeah, no, I appreciate the work that you're doing, because the traditional media was so dominant for so long. These video forms of advertising, and now with like over the top and some other ways of being more nimble on their side. The question is, it's like, how do you compete with how does the traditional media guy come in with numbers, whereas the digital media guy is saying, oh, has all these KPIs. You guys sound like you're bringing some hard data to stuff that's been traditionally hard to quantify.
I think that's true. I think that with new formats, there's a gap. It's not like you can rely on ratings for a new format. And so everybody in the market needs to have some sense of the efficacy. And at the front end, we do the research that really provides that kind of data. And then later on, we provide the evaluative work that kind of like talks about an individual campaign and how it's performed, particularly in those new lanes, where there aren't kind of like common currencies in the market yet. So that's certainly a lot of what we do. Of course, we do other things as well. We do program research, pilot testing. So we have a pretty broad remit in those spaces.
Yeah, so I'm sure there are CMOs out there that are used to digital advertising, where they have reports and reports of data, and they're just they're tracking conversions, and they really think that, who needs to test? Let's just see if conversions or sales let them be the tests. Like, is that belief dangerous?
Yeah, so incrementalism definitely has its place. I think it's good for optimizing. So I think when you have a strategy and you're deploying a strategy, you really want to optimize. But a brand needs to know what it's doing, not just kind of like see the end results, but understand the moving parts. And the problem with incrementalism is you don't understand the moving parts. You don't know the why behind things that you see. You end up making assumptions, and those assumptions can be very dangerous. So what you want is the empirical evidence which answers the why. In other words, you don't want it to be a gut feel thing. You want solid evidence which tells you why. In a lot of ways, I think the question that you're asking is a many centuries old question. It's the battle between Aristotelian science and Galilean science, empirical science and analytical science. And the way that Aristotle made sense out of the world was by observation and by categorization. And so he would, for example, if he wanted to classify creatures, he would say creatures that fly, creatures that are on land, creatures that are on sea, and he'd come up with subcategories, and every observation goes in a bucket. And as a result, you end up with all kinds of assumptions about how you think things work. So, for example, one of those was about heavy objects falling faster, because if you observe, you can see that heavy objects must be falling faster than light objects. But of course, Galileo came along with a very different paradigm of science. And his paradigm is based on variables and isolating variables to understand their effect. And so that same question about, a heavy versus light object, what he did to isolate the variable is he created 2 ramps. The story is usually told around the Tower of Pisa, which is of course fiction.
Yeah.
It was these ramps that he rolled them down. And then he built these ramps, 2 balls, identical in every way, one's heavier than the other. Same shape, same volume, same surface material, just one's heavier than the other. And then what he did is he put bells along the way on the ramp. So as the ball rolls down, the bells chime. Then he releases the 2 and he sees, they actually chime at the same time. So that assumption that was behind, the Aristotle observations was actually flawed. So the only way that you can really get to that level of why is with that kind of empirical science, which is really grounded in experimental design because of that ability to isolate a variable and properly measure it. So what brands should be doing, rather than just the incremental thing, which is really, like I say, a tactical response, is they should be very clear about what their communication objectives are. And for each objective, they should have the best-in-class measure to make sure that they are properly understanding how that particular variable is performing across creative executions. And that's the kind of game I think that we engage in. It's not in competition with the kind of incrementalism and tactical research that you're talking about, but it helps inform it. So it's part of the puzzle.
Yeah, we're, as a lot, marketers are not known for wanting to be disproven, or our hunches to be disproven, or our assumptions to be challenged. But what can you sort of gave us the gist, but how do we become more scientific as a group of brand marketers?
Well, I think you're right in that the commitment to a scientific approach, inherently means that it has to be falsifiable, and that means that you have to have the ability to, and we wear it with pride. You have to have the ability to go to a client. And you have to have the ability to say, this doesn't work. You're not getting the results you thought you were getting. Your competition's doing better than you, whatever it is. But this is another reason why the empirical approach is so much more powerful, because it is equipped with the why and not just the what. You actually learn from that. So you can actually look at something that fails and you can understand why it fails. And in that context, what you're able to do is not just go back with not just with bad news, but with bad news and potential solutions. If all you were doing was being the bearer of bad news, well, what's a marketer going to do with that? I mean, all you do is just make them look good. But if you go back with the bad news and with the potential for a solution to that, which, to be fair, is going to require more testing. I mean, that's the nature of the beast. But at least you're not wasting your money with something that's going to fail in the market ultimately. So you're instead learning from that failure and potentially really getting to a solution which is far more likely to work in the marketplace. So I think that's the nature of that kind of challenge, if you will.
I never thought about like that difference between the what, having some insight on the why versus just iteratively looking at your sales data. That actually presents itself with solutions when you know the why. When you see the numbers just on the wrong trajectory, that doesn't tell you anything about
You don't know
at the ground.
what's going on. You're making assumptions about it, which could be wrong. I'll give you a great example of this. We looked at in one of the big projects that we did. We analyzed all of the interactive TV data that was coming out of a major UK provider. And we analyzed this data, the response data, the clicks, basically for like a connected TV style environment. We analyzed the clicks, and they had observed that a lot of their best performing cases were cases where people had clicked for more information. But what we discovered through our methods was that request for more information was the kiss of death. The request for more information drove response down negative 470%. It was just about the worst thing you could do. Now, it happens that a lot of these these star performers did it, but they succeeded despite that, not because of that. And their superstar performance created the misperception that that was happening because of that call to action that said click for more information. So only with really the power of experimental design do you get at what's really going on and what really drives an effect, instead of anecdotally what you think might be going on, which is, again, very dangerous potentially.
Yeah, it makes me think of the nature of assumptions. Like, we really can't execute on anything if we're down to zero assumptions. We're always making assumptions, but just being aware of those assumptions, aware that assumptions are being made, and that if you have the opportunity to disprove them, that you invite that opportunity, then I think you'll be okay.
Well, and one of the things with that as well, I think that's important for us to remember, is that we used to be an industry, I think, that could get by on some assumptions because we had 50 years experience with the medium. Yesterday looked exactly like tomorrow. A 30-second commercial was a 30-second commercial, and that didn't change much over time. It was the same kind of like ad format. But now we don't live in that kind of world. Now we live in a world of perpetual change. And we're constantly dealing with things for which we have no experience. And so we don't have the kind of experience which informs our gut feel ultimately. And so we're really performing kind of like it's much more dangerous today, I think, to be relying on those assumptions than it might have been 10 or 20 years ago.
Yeah, for sure. If you're on the highway in a rainstorm and your visibility gets limited, what do? You slow down. Well, people, I guess, were used to a much slower environment. Now they got to go with the speed of traffic, but they got to get those windshield wipers going and get some visuals going. So,
well, research is the remedy to the unknown. So if we don't know, we better do research to figure it out.
Yeah, get some more data. So on that topic, so neuromarketing is associated with a lab environment. It can be hard to get participants into the lab. You have to pay them something. There's all the equipment, obviously. I'm sure that has quite a price tag. But is neuromarketing testing getting a little more accessible now? I'm sure technology is working on these problems.
Yeah, it's a lot more accessible than it's been, certainly. I mean, the most accessible is really facial coding, analysis of muscle movement on the face, which can be done with a webcam. So that does not require sophisticated technology. People who are born blind at birth display exactly the same facial gestures as everybody else. Your emotion is hardwired to your face. And so seeing a person's reaction and mapping the muscles on the face and trying to codify them, that's a very powerful neuromarketing tool that is both inexpensive and readily available. So that's a great example of, and it didn't used to be like that. 10 years ago, when I was doing facial coding research, we had to use facial electromyography, which was wires on the face. So we've gone from something which was fairly intrusive to something which is entirely natural and relatively inexpensive. Another area where we're seeing some real progress is in at-home neuro measures. We have deployed a panel, for example, where we measure people in home for their galvanic skin response and their heart rate. And even now, it's still a little bit expensive because we have to actually mail kit to people, and the kit's very expensive. But it's getting, it will get to a point where you will be able to use sensory devices on people's wrists, like the equivalent of a Fitbit, that people already have, to be able to get data. It's not what I would call reliable yet. Like, we still have a path to improving a lot of the quality of those measures, but we'll get there. We're getting there. Those measures and the algorithms behind them are constantly getting better. And so I do think that this is something that becomes more and more accessible and more, natural and more available over time, for sure.
Yeah, I'm sure as those data capturing devices get less intrusive, the closer you are to the environment that people are actually watching ads in, so the data becomes even better. So you get like nice convergence there.
For sure.
So,
And
so
there are some of those there are some technologies that won't become accessible. I wouldn't expect to see EEG or fMRI or anything that's really doing any serious brain imaging, for example, at home. But we are of a school that those particular measures can, that the data that you need from those can be collected through less invasive ways. So for example, recently we did a great study for Google in collaboration with the Ehrenberg Bass Institute. And we demonstrated that heart rate, for example, was just as good as EEG in measuring for attention. And so again, this is becoming more accessible because before, people I think would have thought that to get reliable measures of attention, you needed a full EEG kit. Obviously that's going to be a lab-based challenge for a long time still. But if it's heart rate, again, a Fitbit can give you that and reliably give you that. So again, we're moving into, I think, into some exciting future possibilities around that.
So with all the testing that you've done for all your clients, I guess we at Brand Marketing Blog, we're assuming that a lot of these things that we hold true are true, but they are assumptions around branding. So we assume that building a reputation helps build and sell products. When you scrutinize that with neuroscience and behavioral data, does that assumption hold up? What is the role of brands when you're testing?
Well, absolutely. I mean, everything that we do shows differences. Not only differences by brand, but subtle things like where an ad is placed, what the environment is around the ad, what the format is. All of these things matter. So all of the fundamental laws of branding really apply. I mean, without branding, you're a commodity and you live or die just on the product itself, but you don't really get the added value there. And that's really what the brand ultimately brings. So there's no question that the classic rules of branding, always apply. There's a lot more that we're learning, and we're going a lot deeper in understanding how branding works. But certainly, I think the fundamentals were true before, and they continue to be true going forward.
Oh, that's good to hear. As you said, the brands live in the mind. So with the neurosciences are a way to actually understand that. So I hope that I'm sure we'll see more testing as the decades pass, and we'll see. I'm sure people will have advantages. The people who test will have advantages that others won't.
Yeah, and let me just give you an example of that to illustrate that. So, we know historically that attention matters. However, good research done long ago, has always demonstrated this peculiar problem, which is that low attention can also lead to high sales. And this has really created something that has confused the market for many decades, which is, we think that attention is a good thing. Why is it then that low attention also does well? And this kind of doesn't make sense, right? We, using neuroscience, have helped solve that mystery. And what we've discovered, again, this is the work I talked about earlier that was done for Google in collaboration with the Ehrenberg Bass Institute. And what we discovered was that people have been conceptualizing attention wrong, and not just on this marketing question. Across the board, we've been conceptualizing it wrong, even for things like driving studies and things like that, driver fatigue and things like that, because we always think of it as a continuum where it's like attention, and if you have a little bit of attention, that's good, but more attention, that'd be even better. And that just does not hold and stack up to the data. And the reason is because attention doesn't work that way. Attention is a threshold. And if you get above the threshold, you have your foot in the door, and then it's up to other things to deliver the impact. So really, we're thinking about it wrong. We shouldn't be talking about attention. We should be talking about inattention. In fact, the way we now define attention at MediaScience is we say attention is the lack of inattention. And we can reliably measure for inattention. And if you don't have inattention, you've crossed that threshold. Now it's about a whole bunch of other measures and how they fly. So it's just
Yeah.
that threshold. Once you're past that threshold, there's no added benefit in being a little bit more, a little bit less. It's just you're paying attention. Now it's about all the rest of the things that have to trigger in. But it's just an example of this point again, that these tools are helping us understand these classic ideas, these classic principles much, much better than we've been able to understand in the past, because we can now properly measure them.
Yeah, that makes absolute sense to me. I always think of branding as a heuristic that people use. Like if you're going to the grocery store and you've got some time to pick the right protein powder, then you might be in there reading labels. But that's not the world we live in. And when people have to go about their lives and they can only give limited attention to their purchases, where do they fall back on? And a lot of that's brand. They this is like, I trust this brand, and in the cart it goes. So it makes absolute sense to me that branding would really live in a space where attention is limited.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. And because of that, that's where the primary value proposition lies. If you're looking at a pair of shoes, the shoes, might sell for $130, and the manufacturing of it and the shipping of it and everything might be $20 of that $130. The rest of it is basically the brand. And that is the reason why one pair of shoe is going to sell and the other pair of shoes not. So it's not just that it's delivering a value or like an incremental value, it's actually
Mm-hmm.
delivering the lion's share of the value. So it's a big deal at the end of the day.
Yeah, yeah. No, I again, I relate to that too. I always have this battle in my mind where I know that there's people that are critical of branding as some sort of like mind game. But if somebody has a car, and because they have complete trust in whatever brand of car it is, and the experience of the car is just ease and it just works and they're happy with it, like who's to say that isn't real value? Like who's to say that improvement on the perception of the product isn't real? So
Yeah, it's a good point, because we need to recognize that if we lived in a world without brand, it would not be a better world. It would be a worse world. Brands make an investment, and that investment gives us a better product continuously. And that would not be the case if we were trading ultimately on a commodity. So we live in a better world because of brands, not a worse world, for sure.
yeah, you're preaching to the choir with that. So what I'm curious as a designer is, can brand identities be validated with neuroscience? Like, can we look at some objective measure if a company's rebranding, of if one look will work better with the customer than another look?
Yeah, absolutely. I remember one study that we did. It was for ESPN, and it wasn't an ad. It was actually a promo. So it was promoting a program. It was promoting basketball, a basketball game or something. And we looked at a single word. We were understanding the impact of a single word. So it was an A/B test. But of course, we had the power of a lot of tools. We had the power of eye tracking. We had the power of the biometric measures to look at how people were reacting and how they were responding, and everything. And the only difference was whether the word said, watch on Thursday, or whether it said watch tomorrow. And the word tomorrow is a very arousing word. It's actually a very exciting word. So what we discovered was that using the word tomorrow significantly improved memory, but more importantly, it changed the way that promo was experienced. So they were much more excited when they saw the promo because it was tomorrow. So of course, with this kind of A/B testing combined with the power of experimental design, you can test anything. You can test music, you can test color, you can test absolutely the effect of every little nuance that is there to understand its effect. So you're absolutely right. It's very powerful. I think one of the things on the creative side that's been very frustrating for creatives historically is it's frustrating for creatives coming into a process where they don't feel that their objectives are reflected in what they hear. So, the classic story is, you produce this ad, you think it's great, then you get these research people who come and tell you like, oh, it didn't test well or whatever. All of that is speaking a language which is very foreign to you. You're getting some results which, you kind of that are about the effect ultimately. But that's not what you're about. However, imagine by way of contrast that what you are hearing and what you're being told is actually about your creative objectives. You thought you were making people laugh, but guess what? The joke wasn't funny. People didn't laugh when they saw that. That actually speaks to you as a creative. It speaks to your objective, not the overall marketing objective, not the objective that the suits have. My objective as a creative in terms of what I was trying to do emotionally with my message. So now you have measures which speak specifically to the objectives that the creatives care about. One of the studies that we did again for ESPN, again, this was a program study, but we were looking at this talent. We were testing this talent who was very, very, very difficult and who hated research. And so not very receptive to feedback. And they had this segment where they were talking about racism in sports, and it was a little bit of a had a little bit of a political tone to it, which people generally don't like in the sports context. And they thought it was great. They thought they were doing a fantastic job. We showed them the data. And we showed them the data among African American viewers, among white viewers, and for everybody, this was a huge turnoff. But what was more important, it changed the way the rest of the episode was experienced. So once they had that sour taste in their mouth, they could not experience the rest of the show in the same way. So that spoke to him in his language, and he responded well to the research because it was actually speaking to what his objective was. So I think these measures are really powerful on the creative front because they are speaking to the objectives that really matter most to creatives as well.
Yeah, no, I agree. I just apologize. They're doing some fire alarm testing in my building, and so if there's any noise in the background, let me know. Let me know.
That's fine.
I always thought inviting creatives into the testing environment would always be really effective. Whereas we sort of factory line creatives, and it's like, okay, pump this out, then go on to banner ad 47 and whatever, and they stay at their desks, as opposed to actually getting some feedback from the testing environment. I remember listening to photography podcasts in the early 2000s when digital cameras were coming into the market, and the photographers were explaining how these people that had never shot on anything but digital were getting so much better so quickly because they were taking the picture and then they were looking at the picture and then they were taking the picture and they were looking at the picture, and the feedback loop was so close. Whereas on the creative side, we we expect nice creative from people, and then there's the feedback is either delayed or never comes at all. Whereas if there's a loop between, oh, this person produced this and then they get to see how it is, you're just going to develop better people and more effective people. Okay, so another thing I wanted to talk to you about was brand associations. Like, obviously, there's some big brand associations that have lots of investment in them, like Nike with athleticism or Volvo with safety. But I'm sure there's a lot of subtle brand associations that are not as easily understood. Are there ways of testing to see if these brand associations are sticking in the customer's mind?
Yeah, for sure. So one of the most common tools that's used is response latency testing. So basically the background here is where you hold an association, you will respond faster to it than if you don't hold the association. So you measure the speed of people responding to a particular, to testing a particular association. There are strengths and weaknesses to the methodology. What we find generally is that's a really powerful methodology where where you have something going on that people may not be willing or able to articulate. Like if you're dealing with gender roles, if you're dealing with race, those are areas which need response latency, because there's really no other way of kind of like, getting under the hood, so to speak, to see what's really happening under a person's consciousness, under a person's awareness, because they're not generally aware that that those issues are there for them. But we find that with most associations, they're actually held pretty much at the surface, and so you can use a variety of more traditional techniques. The one that I think is easiest to do in terms of not necessarily relying on neuro methods is just discrete choice analysis. Giving people a variety of choices, of paired choices, and understanding the decisions that they make to kind of like tease through the associations that they hold. And again, because most of those are going to be very much conscious associations that they're holding, then I think that those methods will work. But anytime you have something happening that you think may elicit a elusive response on a participant's part, I think you really have to resort to going to response latency testing.
Yeah, my understanding of response latency testing is that if you conjure up a brand or any sort of cognitive category, that things that are associated with that are sort of ready to fire in your mind, and that thoughts or actions or responses will happen faster between concepts that are associated. Am I correct?
Yeah, no, that's exactly right. That's the fundamental premise, is that, that it's effectively primed by the association. So if you were to say Volvo and safety, is a Volvo safe, you would expect that people would respond faster to that association than they would respond if you said, is a Volkswagen safe? They'd have to think a little bit longer about that and say, is a Volkswagen safe? So that speed of their response is reflective of an association that they hold.
Yeah, that's got to be extremely powerful for brand managers, because there might be associations that are working and you want to double down on, or there might be associations that are negative, that maybe you don't want to be associated with, discount or whatever.
Yeah, it's a really good point. Response latency testing is actually a great tool for looking at negatives, because again, people generally have a social desirability bias, and so they won't want to tell you a lot of the negatives necessarily. They want to get invited to participate in the next survey or whatever. So oftentimes, you have a bias that's reflected through that, and response latency looks beyond that. So you're right; it's a good tool for negative associations as well as positive.
Yeah, well, what a nice map that would give to a brand manager who's trying to navigate the next 10 years of some of these brands. Now, I think what we've talked about is useful for established brands, but I know that a lot of the people that come to the blog are smaller players that may not have the budgets, or maybe not be making like $1 million decisions. So I imagine that it would be silly to test a social media post, but if you're doing a Super Bowl commercial, it would be silly not to test that. How and where do you think, how do you help people determine where the line of what we should test and what we shouldn't test? How do you figure that?
Well, and you're also right in it's not just the small marketeer who needs a lower budget solution. The large marketeer, they don't only have the tentpole studies, they often need their day-to-day studies as well. They need the constant evaluative work that needs to happen, and that also needs to be more cost effective. So we definitely have the studies that are deep, and those studies have a lot of tools thrown at them, like the eye tracking, the biometrics, the neuromarketing tools, all that. But you also have some that are not as deep, but still give us a lot of information. So some of the ones that we have there that I think are accessible to even small marketeers. One of them is an OTT channel, an over-the-top channel that we've launched ourselves. It's our own private Netflix, if you will, our MediaScience channel. And the reason that we use that is because that allows us to properly A/B test things. We have a lot of different skins, so we can make it look like it's a Hulu experience or a Peacock experience or an HBO Max experience or whoever we need to make it look like. One of the tools that we have there that's great, I think, for again, a low budget marketeer, is we have built-in dial testing. So we have a tool that we've built in where you can use the keys on your remote control to indicate your response second by second to what you're seeing. And so it's a proxy. It's not as good, but it still gives us a little bit of detail, kind of like on a continuous basis, second by second, in terms of how people are responding to the content. So that's a nice, relatively inexpensive, tool that's available to the market. And then, of course, the other one is focus groups. Now, focus groups have been around forever. We've launched a division of media science, which we call Heart Connect. And what we have determined to do for Heart Connect is to bring our full range of tools to make it accessible and available to the qual research industry. And what's great about Heart Connect as well is we're using and we've built a lot of AI tools to help people, so that effectively you have a virtual assistant who's there sitting by your side during the session. And that virtual assistant, we call her Ava. Ava is actually coding content. Did somebody just say that word? She'll code it. She can translate into over 60 languages in real time. So you could see your session or your client in Germany can see the session in German. The editing tools are really powerful, so you can go in and extract. There's sentiment analysis, which is looking at the words and classifying whether they're positive or negative. And we have biometric tools that we're bringing into the mix gradually. So we're trying to make a lot of those tools, algorithms, technologies, kind of like accessible, even at a very small level for qualitative research, for the people who do the day-to-day bread and butter research around focus groups and in-depth interviews and things like that.
So yeah, so maybe that makes me think about what I was thinking with the question, is that maybe it's not a hard line between testing, no testing. There's figuring out what test and what is appropriate, and there's going to be fidelity differences between those things. But getting some data involved is always a good thing.
Yeah, I think the bigger challenge is not about a study or a method. I think the bigger challenge is about a culture. A brand, to succeed as a brand, you need different ingredients. And particularly because of the level of change in the market today, I think one of those ingredients has to be research. And so you have to have a culture of research. And I think that culture needs to be based on substance and quality. There's no point in having bad research. Bad research is worse than no research, because it leads you astray. So you want good quality research. And of course, you're going to have constraints, budgetary constraints. So you have to figure out how to develop the culture of research, within your means. And there are ways of doing that. But I do think that the bigger challenge is the challenge of having the right culture. And if you don't have that, you will be at the mercy of the elements. You might succeed, but it's kind of haphazard whether you succeed or fail ultimately.
Yeah, I agree. I think in branding we have a huge selection bias, in that we see what the brand leaders are doing. Well, Apple is perennially the example here, and we say they so decisively, we are doing this, and this is what is going out. But they may have come up with 100 ideas, put them to scrutiny, and then the only one you're seeing is the one that they're 100% confident in. But we, as small business owners, and go out there and says, I have to be decisive, I have to make a decision and stand by it. And that's true maybe on a go-to-market strategy, but prior to that, you should be coming up with ideas and throwing them out as much as you can.
Yeah, I don't know if that's quite the Apple example, but certainly it would be the Procter & Gamble or the Mars. I mean, there are many brands that I think would be learning exactly as you say. through failure as well. But you're right. We can't commit to something if we don't know whether it works. We really need to have a few kind of arrows in our quiver to pull the right one out, the one that's most likely to ultimately succeed. So the investment that we make and I mean, it's really kind of a form of insurance. We want to back the winner. We want to back not just the winner generically, the winner for our brand, the winner for our objectives. So not all formats are going to be equal. Not all environments are equal. We need to find the ones that are optimal for us. And the investment that we make in getting that right is going to repay itself 1,000 times over, because it saves waste in other environments.
Well, thank you so much for your time today, Dr. Varan. I really appreciate it. I have one last question. Is there any advice you want to leave the brand builders out there with that'll help them?
The only advice, it's something that I said before, don't expect to go into an environment that is constantly changing with gut feel, with instinct. You need to have research to guide you through the changing landscape. It's critical. So however it is you go about doing it, that's fine, but just make sure that there's some process there for guiding you through those challenges.
Yeah, so coming back to that culture of research. Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate it, and I'm sure we'll be talking again soon.
That was tons of fun. Thanks.